Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Irish Pen na hÉireann event in partnership with Imagine Belfast Festival. Fáilte roimh go léir. Irish Pen is an all-Ireland organisation, and we welcome applications for membership from both sides of the border. The mission of our organisation is to promote friendly cooperation among writers in every country in the interests of literature, responsible freedom of expression, and international goodwill. And you don't have to be a published writer to join us. An active interest in literature and freedom of expression is sufficient to assure you of a warm welcome. And you can check out our website for more details. And now to our guests. We at Irish Pen na hÉireann are proud and privileged to present two journalists to you this evening, each of them living and working in Peru. Their lives and their investigative work illustrate the challenges and the dangers faced by working journalists everywhere when they tackle uncomfortable topics and dare to speak truth to power. And while the title of our event is Under Fire, Journalists in South America, we at Irish Pen are also acutely aware that journalists closer to home also suffer threats and intimidation in the course of their investigative work. Our first guest, award-winning journalist Paola Ugaz, came to the attention of Irish Pen as a result of our close working relationship with PEN International. Each year, PEN International highlights the life and work of those who have been imprisoned or who, like Paula, face intimidation and death threats because of the investigative work they have undertaken. For more than 10 years now, Paula's investigative work has taken her deep into a far-right religious organisation called Sodalicio and its links to powerful social and business interests. She has exposed the abuses and corruption endemic in that organisation. And her new book, to be published later this year, explores the extent of its complex and murky financial dealings. Dan Collins, our second guest, is a multimedia journalist and filmmaker also based in Lima, Peru. He covers the Andean region as a correspondent for The Guardian newspaper, CGTN America Television, and the BBC. He reports on everything from politics to culture, but focuses on the environment and human rights. One of Dan's recent projects is the film The Adventures of Wonder Woman, a documentary investigation into illegal gold mining in Peru's Amazon, made with colleagues for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Immediately following this evening's interview with Paula and Dan, there will be a panel discussion facilitated by my Irish Pen colleague and Belfast native, Maria McManus, and two journalists, Patricia Devlin and Catherine Johnston. Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening, and I hope you enjoy the event. Paula, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Ante todo, felicidades de parte de Irish Pen na hÉireann por tu premio reciente de Women's Media Foundation, un premio que reconoce la valentía que has demostrado en todas las investigaciones de tu carrera, sobre todo en el caso de Sodalicio. ¿Puedes explicarnos lo que te empujó a ser periodista? Las ilusiones al principio y todo lo que esperabas cambiar o explorar en tu país.
La palabra coraje viene de corazón. Es una palabra francesa de courage y significa echar el corazón por delante. Creo que no hay nada mejor que define mi trabajo como periodista que es eso, ¿no? Tengo ya más de 20 años como periodista y investigar a una organización religiosa donde hubo abuso sexual a menores de edad, físico y psicológico, durante una organización que tiene ya 50 años, realmente ha marcado mi carrera porque me ha hecho hermanarme con un grupo de sobrevivientes que jamás hubiera conocido si no hubiera estado en este caso. Eh, Creo que el caso Sodalicio, digamos, marca mi carrera por la persecución, por los juicios, pero marca mi carrera también porque me hace crecer como periodista, me hace enseñar la palabra resiliencia como parte de mi vida diaria, ¿no? Y me acuerdo cuando empecé en periodismo, empecé a fines de los años 99 en una revista que se llama Caretas, de una familia que se apellida Sileri, donde aprendí eran los años más duros de la dictadura de Alberto Fujimori, buscaba llegar al poder por tercera vez, y entra esta joven estudiante de antropología a mirar el mundo y aprender periodismo en un lugar que era la mejor escuela para hacer periodismo. Nuestra oficina estaba al frente del Palacio de Gobierno, o sea, frente a Fujimori, y todos los días habían movimientos digamos, contra los protestantes, y había todo el tiempo bombas lacrimógenas que subían a nuestras oficinas. Y al salir de las oficinas a cubrir las noticias, los policías nos confundían con los protestantes y nos, digamos, me acuerdo que me pegaban contra la pared en los escudos, como que ya acostumbrábamos a movernos así. Y para mí, informar en ese lugar, aprender de un gran periodista que se llama Enrique Sileri Gibson, y aprender lo que es el periodismo, contando los hechos y estando en el terreno, digamos, fue una suerte que he tenido maravillosa, porque desde ese momento hemos contado historias que tienen que ver con, bueno, la dictadura de Fujimori, la democracia, los derechos humanos, y digamos, yo cada vez que encuentro una historia no dejo de tener la empatía como parte de mi manera de contar la historia, ¿no? Antes de la historia del Sodalicio, yo me especialicé en temas de derechos humanos, he hecho un libro sobre desaparecidos en el Perú, que a diferencia de Argentina, Uruguay o Chile, que eran los desaparecidos de las dictaduras, eran de clases medias, en Perú, donde se habla quechua y es un país con muchas diferencias, las mujeres que tenían hijos desaparecidos no podían ir a denunciar a sus víctimas a la televisión porque hablaban quechua, porque eran pobres o porque se les confundía como parte de la banda maoísta Sendero Luminoso, y entonces les decían terroristas, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que mi carrera de 20 años tiene que ver que yo creo que me preparé durante muchos años para seguir esta historia. Y cuando conozco a mi colega Pedro Eduardo Salinas, que había sido parte de esta organización, y me pide que lo ayude como periodista de investigación en algo que iba a durar 3 meses y que empezó en diciembre del 2010, nunca pensé en esta aventura que me marqué con mucha felicidad.
Pero entonces, más que una carrera, es para ti también una manera de ser, una manera de vivir.
Sí, sí, o sea, ser periodista, voy a ser periodista hasta que sea viejita, hasta que esté en el asilo, voy a estar haciendo reportajes, para mí ser periodista es parte de lo que soy. De hecho, mi nombre en Twitter es La Reportera. O sea, no, lo tengo en el ADN y no sé cómo, no lo descubrí con anticipación.
Muy bien. Dan, I'll turn to you for a moment. With a surname like Collins, you have to tell us a little bit about your Irish background.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, first, dear Yiv, I hope I said that correctly.
Very well done.
That's about the extent of my Gaelic. I do have an Irish connection. It's not actually from the Collins, as Collins is spelt with a Y in my case. As far as I know, those Collins came from the West Country in England, Devon and Dorset. But my late Irish grandmother was Florence Hughes, she also on my father's side, and she had a theory that the Collins originally came from Drogheda near Dublin. So she, in fact, was from Cove in Cork Harbour, and my father and my aunt spent many summer holidays there when they were younger, and we still have many friends and family in Cove. And I also managed to meet President Michael Higgins when he visited Peru in February 2017, and I was lucky enough to cover that story for the Irish Times. So I got to meet him personally. I found him to be charming. He was able to speak some Spanish as well to the people in Peru, and the president then, who was Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. And he spoke a lot about the Irish women and men who participated in the fight for Latin America's independence from Spain in the 19th century, and also about Roger Casement, who exposed the abuses in the British-backed Peruvian rubber trade. Of course, Roger Casement, the Irish nationalist and one of the leaders of the Easter Rising in 1916, who was executed in the same year by the British authorities for treason. So when I came to Peru in 2006, I was coming straight from the World Service in the BBC in London. And I was, like many young producers, passionate about getting out to report in the world, and in this case, Latin America. There was a lot happening in Latin America at that time. There was Evo Morales, who'd come into power in neighboring Bolivia. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez was president, and in Brazil, it was Lula da Silva. So there was politically a lot happening. And I chose to come to Peru, perhaps not the biggest political story in the region, but certainly as a country that I found to be very interesting and enchanting in many ways. I was particularly interested in stories which weren't necessarily political. Archaeology, the huge biodiversity that Peru has, the environment, the indigenous people. I've done a lot of stories about indigenous rights and human rights here. But as I found my feet in Peru, I found that I became more and more involved in reporting on politics, reporting on the recent political history, of course, which involved human rights abuses on a massive scale. And I found that everything I covered in Peru inevitably was involved with politics and corruption in some way. And so when you do an environmental story in Peru, it's always related to what's happening economically and politically in the country, because you're in a country which is so biodiverse that there's nothing that it can be, there's no kind of activities, extractive activities which are conducted without having some kind of impact on people living in those parts of the country, those often very biodiverse parts of the country. And so it's a fascinating country to cover, even in Latin America. And whatever you cover, whether it's drug trafficking or other illicit economies like illegal gold mining or logging, which I've focused on quite a bit. You have a country which is known for its Andes Mountains, but most people live on the dry desert coast. And 60% of the country is actually Amazon rainforest. So it's full of contrasts and a lot of inequality, a lot of human qualities. And I think there's so much more to cover in this country and to tell the world about, I think. And that's really what I do as a correspondent for international.
And you focused a lot, which I can come back to in a further question, but you focused a lot on the human rights around Indigenous workers and Indigenous communities. And we'll certainly come back to that again in a moment. Peru obviously is also a very Catholic country. So I now want to turn back to Paula about the particular scandal that she has been investigating. Paula, he leído Mitad monjes, mitad soldados, un libro que escribiste con Pedro Salinas. Es una investigación condenatoria de la organización Sodalicio, como has mencionado antes, los abusos sexuales, psicológicos y financieros de aquella organización católica que es de la extrema derecha. ¿Puedes contarnos un poco cómo esta investigación haya cambiado la vida entera para ti y para tu familia?
Es una investigación que se publica en octubre del 2015 y que cambia, digamos, que es la primera investigación en Perú sobre abuso masivo y sistemático de una organización católica en Perú, y pone en el mapa a Perú, desgraciadamente, junto a Chile y México en América Latina, de abusos sistemáticos de una organización religiosa. Esta organización se funda en Perú, se llama Sodalicio, la funda Luis Fernando Figari. Una vez que la funda Luis Fernando Figari, durante más de 45 años no les pasó absolutamente nada y pudieron actuar porque tienen lazos políticos, comerciales, y no solo está en Perú, está en Chile, Argentina, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Brasil y en otros continentes, y Colombia. Y no solo es que, digamos, es una metodología, van a las clases altas, medias, y sobre eso te ofrecen estar en una organización que daba prestigio social, porque lo que hace es que hayan una mezcla de sacerdotes y laicos consagrados, que va a ser un camino muchísimo más rápido para el cielo, digamos. Pero para llegar a ese camino tienes que entregar dinero, bienes, ¿no? O sea, digamos, no es gratis, es un quid pro quo. Y esa organización, digamos, no tenía ninguna denuncia hasta el año 2000. En el año 2000, el primer denunciante del Sodalicio es un comunicador joven en esa época también, que se llama José Enrique Escardó, que publica, después de haber pasado por el Sodalicio, 5 columnas contando que había sufrido vejámenes, había dormido un mes en una escalera, lo obligaban a saltar de una altura en las playas 10 metros, vivía en una suerte de Guantánamo, al sur de Lima, para formarlos, porque es mitad monjes, ¿no? Y mitad soldados. O sea, tenían que estar preparados para una guerra, según Luis Fernando Figari, cuando se acabe el mundo, y tenían que ser mejores hombres. El libro se publica y tiene muchísima cobertura internacional sobre el tema, y el Vaticano, en el año 2017, ordena que Luis Fernando Figari ya no regrese nunca más al Perú, no dé entrevistas, y se quede allá, pero no tenga ningún contacto con la justicia peruana. Eso se cambió porque muchísima gente reclamó por ese tema, y la Fiscalía peruana empezó a investigarlo, y yo tuve la oportunidad de viajar a Roma cuando lo fueron a interrogar, y estuve frente a frente a Luis Fernando Figari y le pregunté sobre las denuncias contra él. Y él negó en mi cara, porque él no sabía quién era Paola Ugaz, ¿no? Ahora sabe quién eran las víctimas, o sea, qué decía ante las denuncias de abuso sexual contra él, y él dijo, sí hay víctimas, que no creo, pido perdón, ¿no? Y aparte, yo sabía que él era un tipo soberbio, y sabía que si seguía preguntando, iba a enojarse, ¿no? Y realmente le seguí preguntando sobre las víctimas, sobre lo que él va a hacer, sobre lo que tenía que decir, y realmente lo saqué de sus casillas. Me sentí como un robot, como Terminator, preguntando, y no, al día siguiente, que fue el interrogatorio frente a la embajada del Perú en Roma, protagonizamos una carrera en la cual yo lo perseguía y él nunca lo alcancé, pero digamos, al estar frente a frente a Luis Fernando Figari, me di cuenta que todo lo que yo había escuchado sobre él era eso y más. Eso, digamos, el libro causa un impacto, pero poco a poco se dan cuenta que, digamos, yo anuncio que voy a investigarlos en el donde más les duele, que es en el lado del dinero, en el lado financiero. Y es allí que en el año 2018 inician una persecución judicial contra mí y contra mi colega Pedro Salinas, y nos obligan a ir a una ciudad al norte del Perú que se llama Piura, donde ellos manejan todo, y el sacerdote del Sodalicio es José Antonio Eguren, y nos demanda por difamación. En ese lugar era territorio tomado por el Sodalicio. No había prensa, nadie sabe qué es el Sodalicio. Al llegar al Poder Judicial había muchos símbolos católicos, que no está mal que hayan símbolos católicos, pero dentro de un Poder Judicial era bastante sospechoso, y nuestra jueza, la jueza que investigaba a Pedro, tenía una cruz mucho más grande que yo, parada. Yo no soy muy alta, pero igual era muy grande. La Biblia estaba toda la mitad de su escritorio, y sabíamos que ahí no íbamos a encontrar justicia.
Nada de justicia, no. The abuses of power, Dan, that Paula has just explained there, it just seems to be the theme which is emerging in this conversation, as indeed in many other conversations today. And I read about you in an article from 2021 in the New Humanitarian, where you were exploring the very limited access to the COVID vaccines for indigenous people in particular all over South America. And on that similar theme, you've written about the effect of the illegal gold mining in Peru and what it has done to the lives of the communities there. And I have to mention, and we'll put a link to it in the chat later, of that wonderful film with Karina Garay, Wonder Woman, who tries to have an effect on stopping the illegal mining that's going on. But it's a very difficult conflict, isn't it? Because you've got those who are really in power, who are making the mining continue, and then you've got the very poor miners who come to do that particular work. And then you've got the awful effects on the communities. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, Catherine, thank you. The film is called The Adventures of Wonder Woman. To give it its full title, it's The Adventures of Wonder Woman Inside the War Against Illegal Gold Mining in Peru's Amazon. And thank you very much for putting the link in the chat. It's about 55 minutes long, and I invite anyone to watch it. It's on YouTube, and it's absolutely free to watch. Now, Karina Garay, who is the Wonder Woman of the film, and you'll find out why when you see the film. And she was the chief environmental prosecutor in Mato de Dios. She's this dynamic young woman who herself says she was inspired by a Peruvian folk heroine version of Wonder Woman. She is in this very male world of the armed forces, the police, trying to take the war to the illegal gold mining, which happens in this region of Peru called Mato de Dios, which is in the southeast part of the country, next to the border with Brazil and Bolivia. It's an Amazon region. It's mega biodiverse, but it's also the place where most illegal gold mining takes place in the Amazon. So in these ecosystems, which are very, very sensitive, obviously, the earth's being dug up, rivers are being exploited for gold, and a part of the gold mining involves using mercury to extract the gold. And of course, this gets into the ecosystem. This is part of the problem, but it's not all of the problem. And by some estimates, there's something like 180 tons of mercury dumped into the rivers and lakes in this part of Peru. And of course, that goes into the rest of the Amazon and eventually into the Atlantic Ocean. This, of course, is having an impact on the health of the local people, particularly indigenous people, because they are the people who eat the fish from the river, principally, more than anything else, less so on the mining community. And of course, what also brings with it this illicit economy is a whole series of illegal activities. One of them is trafficking, people trafficking, and particularly the trafficking of young women and girls for the purposes of sexual exploitation. And that's something we also look at in the film. We actually go to a community where these girls come from, in the high Andes, where they're lured by false promises of work in bars or restaurants in these mining areas, and find themselves trapped and being forced to engage in sexual exploitation. So that's also part of the film. It was interesting to do it with this young dynamic woman in this very macho world, and not just the world of the armed forces, but also the world of the miners. And it's interesting to know what's happened now. So I mean, she's been Karina, the protagonist of the film, is now back in Cusco, where she comes from with her young son, and she has retired, if you like. She's pulled out of the prosecutor's office. She no longer works as a prosecutor. Ultimately, the pressure was too much. The de facto power in Mato de Dios put a lot of pressure on her. Of course, there were so many economic interests related to illegal mining and the corruption, and she received threats, and she decided for her sake to take a step back, and faced also by the lack of support that she also received from her own institution. So it's a story which says a lot about the situation, I think, in Peru for many public servants who want to do the best they can and find that their efforts are often frustrated by the de facto powers, which often infiltrate not only the institutions in the country and often are more powerful than those very institutions themselves.
And speaking of pressure, Dan, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier. It just occurs to me that you can't be immune. Am I correct that you can't be immune from getting a bit of backlash for writing reports like that about such uncomfortable topics?
Sometimes there's some backlash, but I feel like I'm very lucky. Being a foreigner, I'm fairly immune and like a lot of my colleagues, from those attacks. And of course, it's quite different from Paula, who has been very much on the receiving end of those kind of attacks. But it's much harder for, let's say, powerful groups or people in the country to attack what you do as a journalist for a foreign media organization than it would be for a book that's published in Peru, as in the case of Paula, or a report which is published in a Peruvian media outlet, because that, of course, would be subject to the laws of the country, and those laws, as I'm sure Paula will be able to explain, can be very pliable.
Yeah, and that's the topic that we're now turning back to, Paula. En un artículo reciente en la prensa de los Estados Unidos, varios periodistas peruanos describen cómo la ley en tu país funciona como un látigo para callar a los periodistas. Christopher Acosta ha dicho que en emplear la ley del Estado así, en aquella manera, como un látigo, es una manera muy potente de mandar un mensaje a cada periodista en Perú. Un mensaje que declara que no te metas con la gente rica y poderosa, porque hay peligro en hacerlo. Y tú sigues con las audiencias, las amenazas, la intimidación. En todo esto, ¿qué efecto tiene este mensaje en tu carrera, en tu obra y como en el trabajo de los otros periodistas? Aquel mensaje de no te metas.
Digamos, yo soy una periodista experimentada, tengo más de 20 años en periodismo. Christopher Acosta, mi colega con el cual me solidarizo, también es una persona, un periodista experimentado. Y esto está pasando también contra Daniel Llovera, Pedro Salinas, contra un grupo de periodistas que dentro de todo, gracias a Dios, somos experimentados y vamos a seguir investigando. Digamos, lo que está pasando ahorita es a las nuevas generaciones de periodistas que están egresando y que en vez de investigar a una persona poderosa, tienen que dedicarse a otros temas porque ven que en nuestros casos nos están haciendo, digamos, nos están apaleando. Y ese es el tema que me preocupa más en general con casos como nosotros. Y creo que esa es como la motivación para seguir adelante, porque tenemos que seguir adelante. En mi caso, yo tengo a los sobrevivientes del sodalicio como gran soporte emocional, a mi familia, ¿no? Y porque si no, no podríamos seguir adelante. Y como dice mi mentor, Gustavo Gorriti, el miedo no puede ser el editor de un periodista, ¿no es cierto? Eso hay que seguir. O sea, me están acusando de todo y yo voy a seguir adelante, voy a publicar este libro y voy a seguir en cualquier otra investigación, porque también, como vuelvo a repetir, si bien esta investigación, esta organización Sodalicio ha marcado mi carrera, no es el inicio ni va a ser el final de mi carrera. O sea, yo voy a seguir con otras historias y ahí la reportera para rato.
But Dan, I presume you're aware of similar types of legislation, things that are happening in Britain. I mean, perhaps that's a wonderful phrase. I think that it's used like a whip. What do you think of the SLAPS legislation in Britain?
Well, as Paula described just there, how wealthy public figures, and in some cases far more shadowy groups, which I think she is facing, using their wealth to influence the law and allegedly influence complicit or possibly corrupt judges, and use the law, yes, like a whip, as Paula said, to silence journalists who are doing investigations in the public interest. And it is particularly worrying to see, while that's happening in Peru, that it's also happening to a degree in the UK with this law that you mentioned, which is known by the acronym SLAP, which, if I'm right, is strategic lawsuits against public participation. I've been watching from afar to see how this law has been used, and I think one of the perhaps the most well-known cases in the UK is how it's been used against Catherine Belton, who was sued by various Russian oligarchs or billionaires, some of them resident in London, like Roman Abramovich, and also the Russian state oil company Rosneft for her book about Putin's people, this incredible investigation which she's conducted, and which, of course, was brought a lot of pressure on her for what she did. And so it is particularly worrying to see that happening in British courts, and see that a country which one would regard as having strong media laws would be seeing these cases take place in cases which, as we can see very clearly with what's happening with Russia's invasions of Ukraine, this is clearly in the public interest and in the interest of the world to know a bit more about these shadowy figures and their billions, and what in fact their links are to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So it's particularly worrying to see that taking place in the UK.
Okay, and that brings me seamlessly on to my next question to Paula. Hablamos hoy con la sombra de una guerra horrorosa en Ucrania. Putin, Trump, Bolsonaro, Lukashenko, hay una lista muy larga de dictadores en estos tiempos tan turbulentos. En julio 21, el nuevo presidente de Perú, presidente Castillo, fue elegido. Por lo visto, fue candidato de la izquierda, pero su oposición al aborto, a los derechos humanos de personas LGBTQ, todo me suena de los de la derecha. Tiene que enfrentar el caos económico después de COVID, las dificultades de millones que sufren una pobreza extrema, y acaba de nombrar un nuevo gabinete por cuarta vez. ¿Cómo le van las cosas?
Le va como le va porque realmente es un presidente que estaba caminando por Palacio de Gobierno, una persona caminando por Palacio de Gobierno y se ganó la rifa de ser presidente, no estaba absolutamente preparado para ser presidente, no tiene un plan claro de lo que quiere ser. Lo que sí tiene claro son sus principios que tú los acabas de decir. Es antiderechos, es un hombre machista. Yo tuve la oportunidad de entrevistarlo en su casa en Cajamarca, en Chota, en un pueblo muy, muy alejado de Lima, y realmente me dio pena, ¿no? Pero decirlo, pero es una persona machista, y una persona machista, cuando está frente a una periodista mujer, no le dice lo mismo que le dice un periodista hombre. Me hizo esperar horas, le pregunté de derechos humanos, exactamente como acabas de decir tú, le pregunté sobre el matrimonio entre personas del mismo sexo, y me miró como miras a un bicho, ¿no? O sea, realmente esos temas, y lo ha demostrado en la práctica, su nombramiento, todo su entorno de gobierno son hombres, todo su entorno son hombres, y hubo una primera ministra que duró menos de 4 meses, que se llama Mirta Vázquez, y que a ella la maltrataban por eso, porque era mujer y porque no podía entrar a este círculo de hombres que rodea a este presidente, en el cual el tema de derechos humanos no le importa nada, en el cual el tema por el cual entró al poder, que es el cambio y el bienestar de un país tan complejo y tan difícil y con tantas diferencias sociales, no va a hacer absolutamente nada. Lo único que se está denunciando en este momento sobre Pedro Castillo es que todo su entorno, sus sobrinos, sus amigos, viejos amigos de profesores, están lucrando en los espacios que está dejando el Estado en un país que ya en los últimos 20 años había demostrado un crecimiento económico, un país que más o menos había entrado en carrera para hacer algo diferente y que está siendo carcomido por una corrupción que viene desde mucho tiempo atrás, pero en la cual el entorno de Pedro Castillo se siente muy cómodo. Ese ecosistema de Pedro Castillo está muy contento y donde no hay nada de cambio para las mujeres, ni en el tema de aborto, ni en el tema de ningún cambio social, digamos, que pueda hacer un cambio en este país. Pedro Castillo no solo es una decepción, porque todavía está en el poder, sino que en un país con tanta fragilidad política,
sí.
Y hemos tenido 4 presidentes en los últimos 5 años,
sí.
Demuestra que no estaba a la altura del cargo, que no sabía, digamos, a lo que se enfrentaba, pero sí ha demostrado una cosa. Ha demostrado que dando mendrugos a cada partido político en el Congreso, puede sobrevivir hasta el año 2026.
Depressing, isn't it? Can I ask you, Dan, what have you got your teeth into at the moment? What are you turning to explore or to investigate?
Well, I don't want to make you any more depressed than you already are, but from hearing what Paula said, I've been writing about an oil spill, unsadly, pretty devastating oil spill, which hit the Peruvian coast in the middle of January, and how Peru is really trying to do its best to get the proper compensation it deserves from the Spanish oil company, which was responsible for that oil spill, which is called Repsol. I think, as Paula pointed out, there are big challenges ahead for Peruvian society and for Peruvians in general. I think for me, having covered Peru for more than a decade now, I think in many ways it faces the same problems as ever. On paper, Peru is classified by the World Bank as an upper middle income country. And in the last 2 decades, it has made huge strides in reducing poverty. But we saw in the pandemic just how precarious that progress was. And when Peru was hit so hard, by the institutions that were revealed to be, threadbare, and the healthcare system, particularly in this case, had huge holes in it, had been chronically underfunded for decades, and we saw that not only that there was the terrible death toll, of more than 200,000 in a country of 33 million. The highest mortality rate, the highest recorded mortality rate in the world, and I'm not saying that there aren't countries with higher mortality rates, but that at least is the official figures in Peru. We just saw how precarious that progress was, and poverty grew again by at least 10% to around a third of the population. So it's clear that Peru has not used that boom of the last 2 decades, the commodity boom, principally being very much a mining country, to build firm foundations and try and build up its hollowed out institutions, trying to invest more in health and education, which are absolutely fundamental in the long term to reduce inequality and to improve the standard of living for Peruvians. So you find it's frustrating as a reporter that you come back to the same problems again and again and again. And fundamentally, one of the main problems is the endemic corruption at all levels, but particularly at the top. Because I think that corruption, I think it does matter where it starts. And if it's at the top, then society will follow suit. And that has been a particular problem. And we're still seeing it now in the executive under Pedro Castillo, when people expected change, but what they're actually seeing is him fulfilling the same kind of patterns which they have seen in previous governments, and also now a deeply fragmented executive, legislative power, the Congress, where it's so fragmented and fractured that there doesn't seem to be any clear ideology left anymore, only the interests of figures and groups. And those interests do not coincide largely with the interests of the Peruvian public.
So do you think that the combination of the election of Castillo, who does not seem to be up to the task, plus the economic devastation of the pandemic, do you feel that Peru's economic development has been set back by several years? Has it undone everything of the last couple of decades?
It hasn't done everything of the last couple of decades. I think that there have been obviously some positive aspects, and in terms of the finance ministry, that the financial policy in the country has remained relatively firm despite the changes of government, and we're talking about 5 presidents in the last 5 years. What does give me hope in the country is the Peruvian citizens who are very resilient and are very hardworking. Civil society has always played a crucial role in the last few decades. They've always been able to push agendas which are important for society, from justice to women's rights to healthcare rights. A whole range of important social changes have been pushed through by civil society in the country. And fundamentally, I think ultimately what gives me hope is that young people are still pushing for change in the country. And I think it may sound cliched, but I do have hope in the young people in the country. I think that the youth will prevail, and they'll be able to eventually push through the changes which the country needs.
No, I think it's great to have that note of optimism. Paula, nos queda poco tiempo. Quiero hacerte una última pregunta. ¿Cómo valoras el apoyo del Papa Francisco y del sobreviviente del caso Caradima en Chile, Juan Carlos Cruz, asesor del Papa en abusos contra menores y que ha visitado Perú en enero pasado.
Bueno, valoro muchísimo el apoyo del equipo que rodea al Papa Francisco y a Juan Carlos Cruz, que es un hermano, digamos, un hermano en esta lucha entre que une a Perú y a Chile para encontrar justicia y reparación a los sobrevivientes del caso Caradima en Chile y el caso Sodalicio en Perú. Su visita ha sido realmente una inyección de energía para mí y Pedro Salinas, porque al comienzo de año mi colega Pedro Salinas sufrió un allanamiento en su casa, como si fuera un narcotraficante, como si fuera un delincuente, y 20 policías durante 5 horas revisaron sus cosas pensando que, como si fuera, como vuelvo a repetir eso, dejando a su hija sola frente a los policías, realmente un momento traumático para los dos, pero claro, mucho más para Pedro, y que en solidaridad Juan Carlos Cruz venga a visitar Perú, a demostrar la solidaridad a los dos, a nosotros dos, ha sido una inyección de energía. Trajo un mensaje del Papa Francisco diciendo que nos quería mucho, que sigamos con las investigaciones y que obviamente los tiempos de la Iglesia Católica son bíblicos, son largos, pero que se está buscando hacer cambios. Hay un arzobispo de Lima llamado Carlos Castillo que está tratando de hacer cambios para poder por fin, digamos, reparar a los sobrevivientes del sodalicio que siguen a la espera de justicia desde mucho tiempo atrás. Y yo quería cerrar esta intervención diciendo, reiterando, bueno, que el miedo no me va a detener, que las denuncias basadas en mentiras tampoco me van a detener, ver mi nombre mancillado, ¿no? Mientras intentan insertarlo, ¿no? En casos de corrupción que no tienen que ver conmigo, tampoco me van a detener, que encima tengan la osadía, ¿no? La ausencia de escrúpulos, ¿no? Para señalarme como jefa de una red criminal, tampoco me va a detener. A más ataques, más periodismo. Voy a decir algo en inglés, con mi inglés a lo peruano, ¿no? I have a very little idea of what I was supposed to be doing, so I set out to learn. What I essentially did was to put one foot in front of the other, shut my eyes, and step off the edge, decía la célebre Catherine Graham cuando hablaba de su encuentro con el periodismo. En esa imagen es donde más nítidamente yo me veo descrita, pese a las amenazas de muerte, al hostigamiento, al uso vil de recursos judiciales y a la ola continua de agresiones en las redes sociales. Cierro los ojos y me lanzo en esta búsqueda apasionante de la verdad. Todo lo que he publicado ha valido la pena, todo, absolutamente todo. Y mi única respuesta a quienes quieran obstaculizar mi trabajo es más y mejor periodismo. Gracias por su amistad y solidaridad, PEN International Irlanda. Gracias, Catherine Dunn, por tu amistad. Un abrazo al pueblo de Irlanda desde la tierra de los Incas, Perú, y Gat Ra Mat Agat.
Well done, Paula. Dan, any final words you'd like to leave us with?
I wouldn't want to try and trump what Paula just said. I think there was a wonderful message, and obviously I know her very well, and I know that I know that what she's been through, and I know that she's going to continue to be strong. And as she said, put one foot in front of the other. Nothing will stop her from continuing to investigate this group and continuing to publish her findings. And I think she represents also many journalists in Peru who find it much harder than I might, being a journalist from abroad, to tell what's happening, the truth of what's happening in their country. So I think she's certainly an example to younger journalists, and I hope she continues to inspire younger journalists in Peru to take this path, because it's so important for the future of the country.
Well, de parte de Imagine Belfast y de todos nosotros en Irish Pen, muchísimas gracias, y también gura mila ma agwith. Thank you so much for taking part. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much, Catherine Dunn, Paola Ugaz, and Dan Collins. Before I go to our other guests for this evening, Northern Irish-based journalist Patricia Devlin and Catherine Johnson, may I just ask Paola first and then Dan? I'm going to ask you the same question. So Paola, if you wish to answer in Spanish, then perhaps Dan can also pick up on the points in English if you prefer that. Can I ask you, what is the most impactful thing that we, the international community, can do in support? And if you just unmute, Paola, thank you.
Hi, gracias. Gracias a todos por estar con nosotros. Thank you for everything, for your solidarity, your friendship. I feel really excited to be with you right now. And I think the best help I can get is spread the news. No, in my country, Peru, when a woman speak in the public exposition, sometimes she suffer a lot of harassment from the judge, from the other powers. I'm not the only one. I won't be the only one. And in the 19th century, a woman as a writer and a journalist called Claudine Mato de Turner, she was excomulgated. I don't know
she was excommunicated.
Yes, she write. Sorry, thank you. She writes about the church and the abuse from the Catholic Church in Cusco. She was from Cusco, and she had to leave to Argentina, and she died there. She was one of the predecessor of the feminism in Peru. And in the 1930s, Maria Jesus Alvarado, another woman, she published in her print in Lima text about a protest in the center of Peru. She was helping some indigenous in the center of Peru called Cerro de Pasco. She has to be in jail 6 months and then leave to Argentina because the government wants that she tell which the leader was, which were the leaders of that protest. So I don't want to put me in that level because they are amazing person, but I think it's an example how they treat the woman in Peru when you says something like this story about the Sodalicium. No, they talk about your body, they talk about your intelligence, they talk about how you can put your voice down. And my only answer is like now I feel like it's like I don't know. I will repeat. It's like more and more journalism. So I'm really happy that you can help me to spread this message to all over the world. And sorry for my English, but I'm really very touched with this event. Thank you.
Gracias. And thank you, Paola. Dan.
Thank you, Maria. Paola, I think you should have done the last 40-minute interview in English. That was excellent. I would just like to say, in terms of how the world can support journalists in Peru, it's really, I think, through governments supporting freedom of expression. It's that simple. And I think that several governments, in Paola's case, and also in the case of Christopher Acosta, who has been facing judicial harassment from powerful figures in Peru. There was a campaign of social media, basically several ambassadors, including the British ambassador, but also New Zealand, Holland, the Netherlands, and the United States, among others, saying that, just pointing out subtly and diplomatically, we believe that freedom of expression is important. We believe that it's fundamental for a democracy. And I know that the government of Peru wants to be a democratic government. I know that they want to be seen as being democratic. And I think it's important that it's really just making sure that it's reminded when these challenges come along, which is not something that's really in the government's hands necessarily, because, you have a weak judicial system, you have corrupt people, you have a lot of money. And so these cases can be, on trumped up charges can be put against people, journalists like Paola, among others. Obviously the government has to say, we can't interfere in the judiciary because, that would obviously be exceeding their powers. And of course it would be seen as not being impartial. But I think it's important just to emphasize the importance of freedom of expression for a country like Peru, which clearly faces a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Just to add to that very briefly, something that the British government has done, and this has really been something that the British ambassador, the outgoing British ambassador, has done, is a program of empowering women and girls and supporting them in science and technology, which is obviously an area which typically in this machista country, in this sexist country, is seen in areas which they don't have the same kind of talents as their male counterparts. That's something that I think that she's done, which has been important. And that has, in sponsoring scholarships and programs for women and girls, particularly girls in education, to show their talents in areas in which they're traditionally not seen as being able to excel. So that's just another important aspect which I would add, which I think is important, is what Paola said about facing, the kind of abuse she's faces because she's a female journalist.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. And thank you, Paola. I'm going to turn our attention now to our Northern Irish journalists and introduce each of them to you in turn. Catherine Johnson is an author, broadcaster and freelance journalist. She's contributed to the Sunday Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Belfast Telegraph, the Times, Irish Times, BBC, Ulster Television and many others. With her late husband, Liam Clark, who died in December 2015, she co-wrote and published Martin McGuinness, From Guns to Government. She is a member of the Belfast Branch Committee of the National Union of Journalists, a member of the Irish Executive Council of the NUJ, and a member of Amnesty International. Patricia Devlin is a crime and investigative journalist based here in Northern Ireland. Since 2019, she has experienced a sustained and systematic series of threats and online trolling campaigns for her work in exposing organised and paramilitary criminals here in Northern Ireland. Welcome, Catherine, and welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. Patricia, if I can come to you first, talk to us first of all about what your resonance with Paola's story is.
Well, firstly, I just want to say to Paola and to Dan, I admire both your tenacity and your resilience and bringing those issues from Peru to the public. And I was delighted to hear Dan saying just there now about the efforts being done to help young women and girls get into certain areas. So much more needs to be done globally. But to hear that, it gives you a little bit of hope. But unfortunately, any journalist, and in particular a woman who challenges any abuses of power, no matter where they are in the world, are open to being abused, smeared, being hit with legal lawsuits and being pushed to the brink. I mean, basically, by
Can you tell us about your own experience, Patricia, just to the extent that you feel comfortable, because I'm conscious that it can also be traumatic to rehash the details.
I'll try to give it to you in a nutshell, Maria, because it can be quite long. But since 2019, and it was after I wrote about the murder of a man in East Belfast, a man called Paola Ugaz, who was butchered in the street by members of East Belfast UVF, which is a paramilitary loyalist gang, basically an organised crime gang that wrapped themselves in a flag in Northern Ireland. Since then, I was subjected to an orchestrated trolling campaign that turned into smears, that turned into rape threats to my child, and then turned into actually the police coming to my door through the pandemic. And it started during the pandemic, warning me of multiple threats to my life and to my safety, and also the safety of my family. The last threat I received was in February last year, when my name was spray painted on 3 walls in East Belfast, an area that I was told by police that I should not be going into because it was too dangerous. And if I wanted to go into it, that I had to let the police know, and that I would have to be accompanied, which, I mean, as a journalist, especially a crime journalist, it's impossible to do your job. You can't go do your job with the police in tow. So it was either, I mean, put your life in danger or listen to the police and leave the most vulnerable voiceless. I mean, apart from the threats and the abuse and everything else, I've come up against challenging the authorities, because one of the rape threats, which was, I mean, police even admitted themselves, they traced it to a well-known criminal who was connected to loyalist paramilitaries. It wasn't investigated adequately. I believed that from the very beginning of when I reported it to the police. I was forced to get my own legal advice. I then was forced to put in a police ombudsman complaint so that the police could be investigated for not investigating my complaint. That complaint was upheld last year. The police ombudsman for Northern Ireland said that the police did not do their jobs properly, and Marie Anderson, who is the police ombudswoman, said that more training had to be given to the PSNI. So, you know, you're not only up against just the threats from criminals and unsavoury characters, you're actually up against a fight with the authorities to try and help you and protect you. Yes. And that's basically in a nutshell. It's not been nice. And I was in a room last night with 3 other journalists, one from Nigeria, one from India, while she was on Zoom, and listening to Paula's story tonight. All our stories are so different. They're absolutely abhorrent, but the similarities are huge, and we're all women, and you can see the similarities, and you just say to yourself, I mean, what can we do to stop this and make this better? Because sometimes you feel it's actually getting worse.
Mm. So if we can just hold that thought, because I think that's a really critical question that you've asked, Patricia. And I mean, I think that what we're dealing with here is always a shock when the journalist becomes the story. Mm-hmm. And further, that the threats against you are delivered by the state in uniform to your door, to your home, on behalf of paramilitaries and criminals. So that, the state turns up as a proxy for these people in a bizarre way. So let's hold that thought for a moment. And if I can turn our attention to and bring into the conversation Catherine Johnson just for a moment. So Catherine, I know just when we were preparing for this interview and in the green room, you brought with you a photograph that many of us have shared on social media last night. Can you share that with us?
Can you see that all right?
We can. Tell us about that.
That went up on a wall in South Belfast the day before yesterday. It's a representation of the kind of quite sinister and macabre game hangman, but the word that's spelled out is journalist, and it shows someone hanging from a gibbet. Now, that would really resonate with Patricia, because Patricia and many other journalists have had similar graffiti put up about them in Belfast. I mean, Patricia, for example, was filmed, was in crosshairs on graffiti on a screen. It's very, very sinister. But I'd like to go back to what Patricia was saying and what you were saying about the whole kind of incidence of the state delivering the threats. I mean, that is particularly sinister. I mean, Northern Ireland has the only two journalists who've been murdered in the United Kingdom as a direct result of what they were doing at the time of their work. And of course, we all know about Veronica Guerin's tragic and dreadful murder in the Republic of Ireland. But
Catherine, for the audience, would you please name those two journalists and remind us a little bit about their story and the context?
Certainly. Martin O'Hagan was the first person who got me into investigative journalism. He was deputy editor of Fortnight magazine, and he commissioned me to do my first serious piece, which was investigation between the ultra-right in Europe and Bologna. And I'm thinking here of Roberto Fiore, who was actually safe-housed in Belfast at one stage. And links between international fascism, loyalist paramilitaries and unionist politicians. And I mean, that went as high as Ian Paisley himself. The sinister thing about Martin O'Hagan is that he investigated a paramilitary called Billy Wright, and he got the blame for calling him King Rat. And in 2001, Martin O'Hagan was shot dead when he was on his way home with his wife. He named his killers. Lyra McKee, before he died, Lyra McKee was a journalist who was shot dead when she was observing a riot in Derry. Almost 3 years ago now.
Almost to the day, it's coming up in April now, yeah.
18th of April. But she was observing a riot. And again, there's very similar situation to compare this to Martin O'Hagan. There's never been anybody brought to justice for either killing. It's quite horrendous when you actually think about it. And I can't really talk about this without getting emotional, because both Lyra and Marty were members of my union. But I remember years ago asking a very senior detective, why has there never been any convictions for the murder of Martin O'Hagan, when everybody knows? The dogs in the street know who killed Martin O'Hagan. The dogs in the streets in the Creggan and Derry know who pulled the trigger of the gun that killed Lyra McKee. And this senior policeman turned round and said to me, the reason behind the inertia on the investigation of Marty O'Hagan is intelligence-led. It's not just the state delivering threats, they're protecting those who issue them and who in some cases have carried them out, and they're protecting them, they're not prosecuting them. And I think we have to remember, I think it was Dan who mentioned about involvement of the state. We can't forget the involvement of the state in Northern Ireland here. Apart from the collusion aspect, we've also got to remember the kind of chilling effect of being arrested under the Official Secrets Act 1911, which I was, and which of course Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey were just a few short years ago. And I mean, again, that was in connection, as Trish mentioned, with the police ombudsman's report. And it beggars belief. It quite simply beggars belief.
If I can bring Patricia back in at this point, we've talked there about the police. We've talked about criminal gangs and paramilitaries. We've talked about some of the dynamics that operate between them. Are the laws we have adequate, or what is it that needs to change? Is it a cultural change? Is it a legal change? Is it public perception and pressure? What helps, or what will bring about change now?
Well, Maria, we definitely have the laws to deal with anybody who is making threats, and especially making threats online. We have the laws. I know that for a fact, because at the same time the PSNI was dealing with the threat that I received towards my newborn son, another journalist in Cumbria, Amy Fenton, was also getting online threats. In fact, she had to leave her home. It was that bad with her young daughter. And I mean, the police over in England, who have the same laws as us, had at least 3 or 4 people up in court and charged and dealt with. And yet I'm still sitting here since 2019, October 2019, and the individual who sent me the threat, who police confirmed sent me the threat, has not even been charged. In fact, he was invited in for a voluntary interview after skipping off to Scotland, then Belgium for a while. So we do have the laws. I can't answer as to why they're not being enforced. I think we need bigger deterrents for anybody who is making threats. The PSNI are obviously, I mean, like Catherine said, the impunity that exists around Martin O'Hagan's murder and Lyra McKee's murder also exists around threats to journalists, because of the intelligence, protecting informers. I mean, I one threat I received, and I think it was the most serious one out of them all, was in November 2020, when police called to my door at 11:30 at night to tell me that my life was in danger from an imminent attack. And they then called back 12 hours later to tell me that I was going to be shot dead within the next 48 hours, named the paramilitary organisation, named the location that they believed it was going to happen, but yet no, couldn't go and arrest the individual. And I believe it was an informer who passed that information to them to find out where it came from or what. I mean, what do we do? I don't know. There's an issue with, I have an issue, and there, the PSNI is, I'm not anti-PSNI, I'm not anti-police. I respect everything they do. They're up against it here in Northern Ireland with the threat of dissident Republicans, and now even yesterday with the threat of loyalists. They're up against it, but that more needs to be done, because other police forces throughout the UK are able to hold these people to account. Why aren't we doing it? Because of the mental pressure that comes with it, the pressure on journalists. And Catherine herself, she's told me personally of the experiences that she had years ago, even before social media, the letters that she was sent around, and nothing ever has been done. And we need to do something, because we are losing journalists to this. The journalists, especially female journalists, are leaving the profession because they can't cope with it anymore. And social media has magnified it massively.
Yes. So there are issues in general here about freedom of speech. There are issues with freedom of journalists to write and speak the truth. There are issues around the ambivalence, really, it sounds like, of the police to act. So if I ask you this question, and then we will ask the same question to Catherine, how then and what must we ask the international community to do to support us in relation to this? Because we can't sort it out internally only within within this place. International scrutiny ought to count for something. Where should we seek support from, do you think? And I'll come to Catherine then in a moment. Go ahead, Patricia.
Absolutely, Maria. The international support is huge, because it helps shine a light on what's not right. And it has made a difference, Maria, because, and Catherine, I'm sure will agree with me, this time 3 years ago, we didn't have a specialist team within the PSNI that was looking after journalists. We now have that after the pressure and the scrutiny came from the likes of PEN International, Irish Pen, Amnesty International, they all put a spotlight on. They released statements then, UJ as well. They all put pressure on, and it made a difference. We also now have an all-party group in Stormont that looks after media safety. So there is changes being made. We just need to continue to do that and hold a spotlight on it. And I mean, there's things that can't be changed, but going forward, there's things that we can prevent from happening again. And I hope, with the support of international colleagues and organisations, we can continue to make that change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Patricia. So, Catherine, can you give us your response then to what the international community can do to support?
Well, no matter what type of journalists we are, we're all investigative journalists. That's our job, to shine a light into dark places. And it can be very, very difficult when we can't shine a light into the dark places that surround us. I mean, I was absolutely shocked by what Paula and Dan were saying about Peru, in much the same way as I've been shocked when I've heard about the terrible attacks in Mexico, in Kabul, and of course in Ukraine, when men and women have been killed in the course of their work. What can we do? We can talk to each other. I mean, we're all part. Join your union. Join the National Union of Journalists. If you're in the UK or Ireland, like Trish and I are both members. And the National Union of Journalists is affiliated as a member body of the International Federation of Journalists, and we have very, very active reports coming back regularly, and we do take part in international actions. I think that's what we all need to do. We have to remember we're all part of an international community. We all have to pull together. In terms of specific issues that could be helped, that could be changed. Well, the social media companies, their role in all this, as Tricia said, is absolutely disgraceful. It's appalling. It's shocking. When my friend Lyra McKee was murdered, just after that, someone who she had been speaking to privately published private messages from her, and her partner Sarah complained to Twitter, and the response, it made my blood run cold. They said, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing against the law to prevent someone publishing private messages of someone who's dead. So that's one thing that Twitter could change in the twinkling of an eye. I mean, it must be an easy thing for them to do. I don't know if any of you are aware, I'm sure most of you are, of the police service right to know, power to tell scheme for victims of domestic and sexual abuse, where anyone who is in an intimate relationship has the right to ask for their partner's history of violence against women or any relevant convictions and so on. And I've always thought that that's something that the PSN, the Police Service for Northern Ireland, could take on very, very easily. We should have the right to ask who the threat is coming from. As Patricia has said, I mean, we don't know how to gauge the threat. We depend on the police to gauge the threat, but there's such a shadowy relationship between police and their sources. And like Patricia, I'm not at all anti-PSNI, but, we have to have the right to ask. The police have the power to tell. They have to tell us. They simply have to. But, I mean, the only thing I can finish by saying is, really, keep on talking to each other. Support Amnesty International. Join Amnesty International. Join Pen the HÉireann and International Pen, which I'm going to say as soon as this Zoom call is over. And build up our strengths in the community of investigative journalists, particularly here. I mean, most of us on this panel are women. There's no doubt about it. The violence against journalists, by and large, in terms of social media, is gender-based, and it's appalling, and it can't go on. We can't let it go on.
Yeah. Let me just stop you there, Catherine, because that ties in really nicely to a question that has come in from Leah Mills, and it is to the whole panel. why do you think there is such a negative reaction to women who speak out in public?
Are you asking me that?
Sorry, if I beg your pardon. Let me go to Paula first. And then I'll come to Dan and to Patricia, and I'll go back to Catherine. So, Paula, why do you think there is such a negative reaction to women who speak out?
Hay un ancestral machismo contra las mujeres en el mundo en general, ¿no? Sobre todo las mujeres que levantan la voz denunciando casos como los que estamos hablando ahorita. Tanto Patricia como Catherine acaban de contar cosas realmente dramáticas y terribles que están viviendo por contar historias que la gente no quiere, shine the light, ¿no? Que no quiere que se pongan a la luz. Y hay un ensañamiento doble si eres mujer. A mí me impresiona que hasta hoy, 2022, nos digan cómo vestirnos, cómo ponernos, ¿no? Cómo comportarnos, ¿no? Y eso les pasa a las políticas, le pasa a todo el mundo, pero también nos pasa a nosotras. Michelle Bachelet, la expresidenta, solía decir que a ella le preguntaban cosas que nunca le habían preguntado a los políticos hombres, ¿no? Y a nosotros nos pasa lo mismo, ¿no? Se mete con nuestra vida social, sexual. Incluso ahora yo salí a un evento de libros y todo el mundo me ha mandado fotos de cómo me debo vestir, qué tengo que ponerme. Y a mí al contrario, me da más ganas de seguir con mi estilo colorido y más colores me voy a poner, porque realmente siento que es como control, ¿no? Es como la mujer tiene que ser controlada. Y creo que me siento muy contenta de escuchar a Catherine y a Patricia, porque siento que como que Catherine ha traído a periodistas que están como hermanadas por las ganas de seguir contando historias tan valientes, ¿no?
Thank you, Paula. And I'm going to come to Catherine Dunn. Is that okay, Catherine Dunn, for you to summarise what Paula has said in English? Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Paula. That was great.
Thank you.
Paula speaks about what we're all familiar with, I think, all of us on the panel, and that is the ancient misogyny which is out there, the machismo which shows itself in different ways in different societies. Women in the public eye, whether they are politicians, whether they're journalists, if they raise their heads above the parapet at all, the response is always from some elements in society to comment on how they dress or how they look or how they should comport themselves. And it's a mixture, in Paula's view, of that sense of entitlement that some men perhaps have to make those kind of comments, and also this sense that women need to be controlled. And that's a very sad state of affairs to still be continuing in 2022. But Paula says she's very happy to find herself in the company of the journalists that we've gathered together on behalf of Irish Pen to feel the sense of solidarity and sisterhood. And we're not excluding Dan from this at all, but to feel the sense of solidarity and sisterhood with all of the journalists here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. And so if we go now to Patricia.
Well, I basically would just echo everything that Paula has said. It is, I mean, it's ancient, it's ingrained, and I think the only way to combat it is for better education, more women in public roles. I mean, it's a battle doing that because we're up against the abuse and the misogyny and everything that comes with it. But I mean, we can't back down, because if we do, I mean, it's only going to get worse. So there's a lot of work to do, but I do think because it's been at the fore a lot over the last 3 years, and events like this and highlighting, you know, the issues on social media as well as like radio and print, that all helps. And I have seen a change a lot of men's attitudes. I'm not blaming everything on men. I think there's a lot more that we can do aside from the education of young men, and there's a lot more, but it's slowly happening, and we just kind of have to keep at it. And just, I mean, my fear is, like Paula had said about women, I mean, not wanting to go into the profession or being put off it. We don't want that, and that's something else we have to do. I think we have to, like, when women are going into public roles, especially journalism, I think we'll have to kind of prepare them for this. And it's not a nice thing to do, but we'll have to prepare them, because I certainly wasn't prepared. And it took a lot from me, and I'm sure Catherine would say the exact same about her experiences. It just, so that, there's a lot of things we can do. It's not all is lost. I think there's a lot we can make things better. Thanks,
Patricia. Dan?
Of course, I'm the only one in the group who perhaps shouldn't have an opinion about this, but I do. I mean, obviously, I would echo what both Paola and Patricia just said about the patriarchy, if you like. I do think, though, in the cases of Paola, when she's been in a Latin American country and really facing the church, which is, as we all know, the Catholic Church, which we're talking about in this case, bastion of misogyny, she's faced particular attacks, because I think they felt affronted, these men, that a woman, dare challenge them, and then they have actually gone unchallenged for decades. I mean, and this is the first scandal involving the Catholic Church in Peru, and you can imagine a country of such a long history of the Catholic Church. We're talking about 500 years, should have a fair few scandals, and I think there's a kind of a relation there. I think with Ireland, and with Northern Ireland in particular, the history of sectarian violence, particularly in Northern Ireland and Belfast. And we're talking about groups which are partly groups which are related to extreme wings of the church, be it the Catholic Church or on the other side, the Unionists, so with the Protestant Church. And so also, I think, links also to organised crime, as Patricia mentioned, and extremist groups, even even a kind of affiliation to neo-Nazi groups. So I think that exacerbates, I think, probably the level of outrage they feel when they're being challenged by women, and the violence of their responses. All I would add is, I think that as everyone has mentioned, social media it magnifies this to a much greater degree. I think, Patricia mentioned that she'd received abuse online, and then Catherine also mentioned that, in the pre-internet era, she'd received letters, with threats. But clearly the magnification from social media puts the onus on groups like Facebook, Twitter, and all the millions and millions of dollars that they're making. They should be putting that money into controlling this online abuse, which has just got completely out of hand. They need to be dedicating those millions to that.
Thank you. Can I just stay with you a moment, Dan? And I'm going to pose this question to you, and Catherine, perhaps you would also pick up on this aspect of it. It's a question that has come in from Patricia to me. Why are some men so weak in confidence that intelligent, outspoken women frighten them so much?
Was that a personal question?
No, not necessarily at all. You don't strike me as being that kind of person. But
I was just joking.
What is it that with some men, even good men, they feel ambivalent or shy about standing their ground? What's going on with our men?
Good, that's a good question. I think there are probably a lot of answers to that. I think, it's a generational thing as well. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that men of perhaps my father's generation were not used to being challenged by women, or even put on the same level in terms of profession or the ability to sort of have opinions about things. I think the key now, for the younger generation is education, and I think it starts at a very young age, and I think that needs to begin in kindergarten or even primary school, where boys need to be taught that that they're about equality. They need to be taught that girls can play football. They need to be taught that, you know, that girls are good at, can be good at science and technology, you know, making things, or are good at BMX riding, or whatever it may be. You know, in the field of sport, I think it's important as well. I think perhaps we underestimated. We underestimated I think we underestimated the societal pressures of you know, the patriarchy of sexism. I think it runs a lot deeper than perhaps we anticipated, and perhaps these changes can't happen in 1 or 2 generations. Maybe it may take more time.
Great, thanks, Dan. Catherine, so you're picking up on both those questions there about why are women so scary to men on the one hand, and what's going on with our men, that they're phased really by intelligent and outspoken women.
Well, could you just hold on 2 seconds? Sorry about that. Just trying to quieten someone down in the background. Well, I think what Dan was saying, he's absolutely nailed it. The patriarchal roots are really, really deep. I just simply don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. One thing I know is that journalism is not a crime, and nor is being a woman. And I'm very, very grateful for all the good men like Dan, and like all the men, all our comrades in the unions, all the people we work with who do stick up for us. And I mean, we shouldn't have to be stuck up for. I mean, for goodness sake, journalism and being a woman is not a crime. It's unfortunate that that so many people seem to see it like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we're into the final few moments of our conversation, and we still have some questions where, unfortunately, we're not going to get through all of the questions that are in the chat. But can I ask you? You know, when the police come, Patricia and Catherine in particular, when they come to you with warnings, is your impression that they're ashamed by their own powerlessness, or are they indifferent? What's going on there?
I mean, they've done it that many times, Maria. It's just going through autopilot, I would say, at this stage. I mean, they have certain things they have to tell you. And they do it. I mean, I have had lovely police officers come and deliver the things to me, and it's horrible. Some will tell you the grade of intelligence, some don't. I'm always thankful for those that do, because then you know whether it's serious or not, but sometimes you can't even get that, you know. So, I mean, I suppose it's like every job. There's different people have different personalities, but yeah, I mean, they're probably doing it not only to journalists but other people, and that's the thing. We're living in a society 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement, and the police are still out delivering these death threats on behalf of paramilitaries to not only journalists but ordinary members of the public if they cross these thugs and gangsters, and it shouldn't be the police's job at all.
Are they? If I can ask. Catherine, then, and on an extension of that question, are our politicians supportive enough? Are they getting off the hook too easily?
The vast majority are, but there's some very, very honourable exceptions. 2 years ago, we did a press campaign on that very subject, that journalism is not a crime. That was following death threats to journalists like Tricia, like other journalists, thankfully not myself on that occasion. But it was particularly sinister in that when some politicians did speak up, they were immediately added to the death threat list. And I mean, that was horrific. Yeah. That shocked and appalled me.
Sure. So we're into the last minutes now. Very quickly, I'm going to ask all of you in turn. Are there any positive signs to give hope that things can improve, or has social media put paid to that possibility? If I come to you, Patricia, first, and then I'll go to Paola. So just to give Paola a little moment to prepare.
Yeah, I'll be very. There is positivities. I mean, we've got the online services bill that's going through. I mean, there's issues with it. I'm not completely happy with it, but as a victim of social media abuse, I would feel more protected. I do think that, in my own case with the PSNI, things have changed massively. They take things more seriously. I mean, in terms of paramilitaries threatening journalists, unfortunately, I believe that's going to continue. I don't see how that can stop unless there's a deterrent set and they're arrested. But there is positive changes. I do believe there is. They're small, but they are happening.
Great. Paula?
Yes, there is a good part of the social media because it helps me to, as an investigative journalist, to contact to a lot of survivors of the Sodalitium sect, and they always write me in anonymous way. Mm. So there is a good part of that, and there is a bad part. It's like, well, that is like in life, and I see that I have a lot of support about my work, and I think that when I find a smile or a phrase of congratulation about my work from the survivors of the Sodalicio that I consider part of my family, I think that everything worth it.
Super. Dan, if I come to you, and we're all going to be super fast because I'll tell you, Catherine Johnson is busting to get out the door. She has places to go, people to see, and an occasion to attend. So she's going to get the last word on this conversation. But Dan, if I come to you and say signs of hope, green shoots, anywhere.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There are signs of hope, and I think we're seeing the younger generation, which is much more uses social media a lot more, are definitely coming out in support of journalists like Paula. In my personal case as well, when I've done stories which highlight, for example, Karina Garay, who's fighting against illegal mining. It's definitely reflected on social media, and I think that there's kind of a backlash against the trolling as well to some degree, a kind of an anti-trolling movement going on. So yeah, I think there's a sense of sisterhood. Brotherhood as well, definitely some green shoots there, and things to look forward to as media changes.
Great. And Catherine Johnson.
Very, very, very briefly, I just want to comment really for my last word on something that both Paula and Dan and other people have spoken, and that's about the abuse of children by the Catholic Church. And in Northern Ireland, we had a state home here called Kincora. And we're listening to Dan and Paula, it really reinforced with me this sense of being part of the international community of investigative journalists. We had a boys' home here called Kincora, which was at the very apex of collusion, cover-up, denial, and that's still ongoing. And one of the biggest battles that we face is the right of freedom of expression and the free and open exchange of information. In the case of Kincora, some of the files are actually held back until 2086. Now, who's that to protect?
Sorry.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. I'm going to what a discussion. I could carry on for ages now. I have so many things that I still want to know, but I'm going to bring this section of the evening to a close and hand over to Catherine Dunn.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. And thank you very much, everybody. What a fabulous discussion. Sobering in many ways, but also very illuminating. And very interesting to see the similar threats faced by journalists everywhere, but how they are exacerbated when women are involved for all of the sorts of reasons that we've discussed. It's also very interesting to see that in many ways the laws are there. It's just their implementation that's at fault. Dan mentioned the weak judicial system in Peru, for example. And Patricia mentioned the fact that the laws might be there, but perhaps not implemented to the extent that they should be in Northern Ireland. And I also found it very interesting that all of you have expressed similar fears about attracting younger people into the profession because of the level of threats which are there. And it would indeed be a shame if the sort of investigative work which all of you journalists have done and continue to do, that would be in any way curtailed. And I certainly think, that there is a case for holding the social media companies, the giants, to much greater account for what they are not doing in terms of protecting those and allowing these channels of abuse and threat to continue. But if I want to end on a very positive note, because it was good to hear of all the green shoots, which everybody believes are out there. And that is, the power of these international connections, that when we keep the conversation going, when there are organizations like PEN International and our fledgling but very active and enthusiastic Irish PEN na hÉireann, it's good to see that these are channels through which differences can be made, through which people can understand what's happening in different countries and understand that really internationally, that is where our strength lies. I want to give a huge thanks to Imagine Belfast and to their partner Accidental Theatre for facilitating this event, to all of my colleagues at Irish PEN na hÉireann, and Maria for facilitating that in such a wonderful way, and to Viviana, who's not on anybody's screen at the moment, but Viviana Fiorentino, who has been the most wonderful support and help to me in the background, without whom this event would not have been possible. And I want to assure Paola Ugaz and Dan Collins that we send you every good wish for your safety and your work in the future, and to let you know that you can count on the support and friendship of Irish PEN na hÉireann into the future. So thanks again to everybody involved, and go raibh míle maithagamh go léir. Good night.